Welcome to the Crystal Zinn podcast. I believe our bodies are a living map of the entire universe. All the answers reside within. Remember, you are sovereign, whole, and infinitely valuable. And the best gift we can give to the world is our own healing. Join me as we explore holistic tools, spiritual practices, and paradigms that are shifting the way people experience life, business, and relationships. I love to share education on the most recent medical research and cutting-edge technology on anatomy, neurology, trauma, development, and more to give us a foundation in understanding how to align, utilize, and upregulate our physical systems. Ultimately, this podcast is a witness and support to people on their journey of remembering, an inspiration for all of us to keep going, and a reminder that we are not alone. Welcome today to the Crystal Zinn podcast. I hope you're having a great day. Today I have Kayse Gehret with me. Welcome, Kayse.
Hi.
Hi. We both just went through a bit of a transition and a move. So if you're feeling that transitional eclipse season right now, we are living it.
Indeed, indeed.
So Casey's gonna talk to us about health, microdosing, facilitating, training, all of these amazing things. And I have had lots of questions from you guys and from my listeners about things like this. The only other podcast I recorded on this specific topic was 2 years ago. And so I'm remembering those questions, and I know a lot has evolved with my audience as well. So stay tuned because she is going to answer all the questions we've had about ideal clients, who should microdose, how it can change your life, her incredible journey from health issues and things that you'll get into a little bit deeper with us and share what you want to curing herself and living this expanded, beautiful, intuitive, and really healthy life now. And so I'm really excited for that. And thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me and the beautiful intro. I'm always so psyched when I speak to an audience that has heard of microdosing before, has curiosity, and it's been extraordinary to watch how much it's evolved in the last 2 years, how much more we know now than we did 2 years ago. So I'm super happy to be here.
I love that, for the better or for the worse too. Sometimes I've had some people coming back with some questions and experiences. I'm like, wow, we really need to be educated, and that's why I'm excited you're here too. So
Thank
thank you
you.
for that. What my listeners know is we always just take 30 to 45 seconds to tune in right at the beginning. So if anyone's in a place where it's safe to do so, you've not had the chance yet today, go ahead and close your eyes, maybe lean back, feel the texture of where your body is pressing into the surfaces beneath it, and just take an exhale. Allow more, do less on your inhales. What would it feel like to not try, but just observe the expansion of the breath? Make note of the quality. Is it short, long, tight, choppy? And then without giving it any story or emotion, just observe the physical characteristics around your chest area, maybe your tummy right now. I know it can feel strange to have silence on a podcast. We haven't left you alone, but I am trying to give you 3 to 5 seconds of quiet vibration, something not bombarding you from the outside so that you can move within. So take 2 more breaths into the chest or belly space. Drop the tongue away from the roof of the mouth and consider coming back with a stronger inhale and maybe a fluttering of the eyes. Welcome back. If any messages came up for you guys, my listeners, maybe hit pause and write that down and then quick join us again. Kayse, I would love for you to share if anything came up for you today with that exercise.
No, just appreciate the opportunity. This has been such a somatically connected time. Um, yes, and so a lot of my clients, a lot of my female clients in particular, are really having their bodies talk to them in spades right now. And so I was just given a moment of still just always in awe by how much we can feel and sense within our physical bodies and with such nuance. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for sharing that because you are the expert in guiding people through that. So I'm wondering if you'll give us a short bio that you think is pertinent to what we're going to talk about today, and then kind of dive into your journey.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I mean, like a lot of the people I work with, and probably some of your listeners too, if you would have told me when I was a child I would one day be working with magic mushrooms, I would not have believed you. I grew up, I'm like super normal, and wanted to be a doctor growing up. And so I went into the healing field very young, and I was studying pre-med in college when I had an intuitive voice go, "Ooh, it's time to move cross country." Took me to California. I listened to her and did quickly when I got there, discovered body work and quote unquote alternative healing methods, studied Reiki, studied body work, went into massage therapy. So my roots are really in somatic practice of many years. And then it grew over time. However, since my teenage years, I had a grand mal seizure disorder as well. And while they never found a biological cause for them, it was treated as epilepsy. I was heavily medicated with Western meds, but I always kind of knew it had something to do with just a very sensitive nervous system that would just kind of reboot when it needed to reboot. So I did all the things and studied lots of different modalities, did the meditation, did the yoga, did therapy. Um, and when I came across someone who introduced me to the concept of microdosing, I had always been averse to any drugs, let alone psychedelic drugs, because of the precarious nature of my brain, just in a normal state. I was like, that's not for me. But by the time I was introduced to microdosing, I was like, one, it's natural, it's a mushroom medicine, it's subtle, it's a perceptual. I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know anybody who was utilizing this practice. I thought, it would expand my ability to meditate or connect with spirit. And after a few months, I realized my seizures had stopped completely and never came back. Also, I used to get headaches constantly. Um, I had probably had one headache since I started microdosing many years ago, and all these other gifts and shifts came in. So at the time, I had healing art studios in Northern California, very full, very growing, very busy until the pandemic. And when we got shut down, I was one of the many people that was like, well, what can we do? I have to pivot. What can we do that's online? And so I was led to, at the time, I thought just to kind of tide us over till we could reopen, did two microdosing groups for my community and put together back in 2020. And they were from the start just absolutely stunning, just fascinating. People have really remarkable results. And fast forward now 5 years, we've done 31 group immersions at this point and have a global community around microdosing. And I now train other people to do microdosing guideship in their own practices.
That's incredible. Okay, that's so much there. I did want to hear that last part because that's what I was really excited about too, is that you train others to facilitate these things. And I think we have a huge need in that area right now, which is really exciting because there's a lot of qualified practitioners who have moved through their own journeys and through their specialties and could add this in and are looking for ways to train. And I think we're lacking a little bit there. At least where I live, we have to reach out for it. So that's exciting. And I really loved hearing your journey there. I had a question about that, if you're willing to answer it. What ages, like when did seizures present themselves? And maybe there's other symptoms that came along with that. And how old were you? And then how long were you on pharmaceuticals and kind of suffering from that ailment before you started microdosing?
They came on when I was a teenager,
Mhm.
grand mal seizures, but even as a young child, I spent a lot of time in the nurse's office as a young child. My father died when I was 7. And it was after that, I remember in the years after that, I used to get really severe headaches um, that young. So it was definitely tied to stress, loss, grief at the time. And then I was medicated throughout my 20s. And it was probably in my 30s that I came off and, yeah, have been seizure free since then.
That just blows my mind and is so incredible because coming from a medical background like you and I do, knowing what developmental changes the brain goes through during those years, most medical research facilities and doctors and stuff out there says if you damage your brain or something's going on with your neurology during that period, you never get it back, right? Like they're saying, don't do THC during that time, don't do these other drugs. If you have an injury during that time, you basically carry that and they portray the story of no light at the end of the tunnel. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, you're just going to carry these things with you forever. And so that is when I heard your story and we were talking a little bit on the phone. Part of what I wanted to get into with some of the research and the things you've seen and just kind of start off with some medical appeal to authority because part of me is like, how? What? Tell me more. Tell me how you can have these ailments in your nervous system during that important time of your life, namely teenage head through your 20s, when your prefrontal cortex is developing, right? And then be on drugs, which were helping you and saving your life probably, and we're grateful for that, but also they affect you, right?
Deeply, deeply.
They
Mhm.
prevent processes from happening and other things happen. And I think I mentioned to you, I have a really close family member who went through that same thing and is still living it today at 40 years old. Um, yeah, and we can get into, I was like wanting to ask, how your brain got open to alternative medicines, but I will tag back to that. And I just want you to tell me more about medically like the
Mhm.
development of the brain, the safety of microdosing. Could you still be on your meds? Like what that process was like for you and the detriments, you know what I mean? The stuff that you couldn't participate in, the stuff that you experienced, all of that. It's not a very important
Mhm.
question, but I just
Yeah,
got
no.
me chompy at the bit.
One of the things I love that's so remarkable about microdosing and almost too good to be true. It's people when you're outside of it, like hearing the stories outside of it, you're like, how is that even possible? Because so much of our Western system of prescription meds is about managing symptoms. Like I said, people have a diagnosis and you think the damage is done and you can't, it's irreversible. It's something you have to live with and something you have to manage. And if even if they do stop, the damage is done, we're told in a lot of nervous system conditions. Microdosing actually it's promotes neurogenesis. You grow new pathways, your brain continues to heal and grow. And so a lot of the things we're told we're condemned to we're actually not. So it's showing great promise with all of the nervous system from Parkinson's to dementia, Alzheimer's, stroke recovery, concussions, TBI, auto accidents, severe skiing accidents. I've worked with multiple people who had seizure disorders who kind of came in not thinking they could get better. They're like, I'd be happy to manage what I have or not have more, let alone repair the damage that has already been done. But we've seen that it is possible that people do regain function that they thought they had been lost forever. I remember going off, I had been on my prescription meds for so long that, and it impaired, like it slowed down my mind. so much and my cognitive function so much, you get used to anything, right? I remember when I came off going, like everything just kind of came back to life. And I realized like I was living on slow motion for so
I was
many
going to say, what
years.
were some of
Yeah.
those things? Are you willing to share? What were some of the things that you lost or that you were living with that you were like, now I realize that was not
So
normal?
much so, I think with so many meds and the side effects, like you're functional, so you don't even realize it because you get used to things. And then a lot of times when people come off their meds, and especially when they're working with mushrooms, they're like, life just turns from like black and white to technicolor again. And you're like, this is how life is. I got used to life this way, this experience of life. People often say it's like a dialed up version, expansiveness, a dialed up, colorful version of life. People often also describe it. They're like, when I was on medications, I felt like I lived in a very low ceiling, a
Hmm.
house with a very low ceiling. And now I feel like the roof has been taken off my house. So, yeah, so many things. Navigating, I've worked with a lot of people coming off of all kinds of pharmaceutical medications for all different reasons. Sometimes they are having side effects. Sometimes people are just like, it's not doing anything for me. Like, I don't think it's harming me, but I don't think it's doing much for me either. And then other people are really drawn to develop spiritually right now. It's very intensely. I've been seeing that as people are really drawn to connect with their angels and their guides, and a great deal of pharmaceutical medications really blunt and dull and kind of make incoherent that connection. So that's another reason people are coming off right now.
That's fascinating. Now that you're saying that, I've seen that as well. And what is the protocol, the research to be done with that, and maybe just in your experience or expertise when someone needs to be handheld a little bit longer? Because I've also seen people who have maybe been on things for 20 or 30 years. I have seen a couple of those miracle experiences where people can have an experience and just be off of it. But I've
Mhm.
also seen some of this, and I wonder how you would describe like the management or flow or how someone would expect to enter a space like that.
I'm super happy to answer that because some of it's really surprising and some of it we didn't know a few years ago. Like we had to see patterns and see how it came across. So what's very common is people think sometimes because they're on a teeny tiny little dose of something that it's not going to be a big deal. They're like, oh, but I just take this little bit of Lexapro, right? It's just teeny. It's way more important how long you've been on something than it is the dosage. So it's actually much easier to come off of something. You have a really high dose of something, but you're only on it for 6 months. That's far easier to manage than a tiny low dose that you've been on for 20 plus years. Very different experience, which takes people by surprise. So it's all workable. It's just nice to know that going in. I've also seen certain tapers. It's a very steep, peaks and valleys for a few weeks to a few months. Others, it's kind of bumpy at the beginning, but then it tends to ease out faster. So we've really learned a lot just by witnessing hundreds and hundreds of people through tapers. And we have a lot of we have pharmacists who support our programs that are available to help people with the Western integrative pharma meds and then the other microdosing too, and how those things interact. And lastly, too, a lot of people have the misconception that you have to taper. Like you can't use psychedelics or earth medicines with pharmaceuticals. You totally can, oftentimes. Like if you're having a good experience with your supplements and your pharma meds, it doesn't mean you have to come off. It depends on what type it is. Some of them have no problem. And oftentimes there's another plant medicine you can work with that won't have a contraindication, can't blunt. So
No.
everything is possible.
Yeah. Well, that is really cool and expansive that there's been enough experience at this point where you can say, well, maybe in this case, here's this. And I'm glad you told me about that because I've worked in recovery for 20 years at this point. And it is so highly supported by doctors, nurses, pharmaceuticals, right? Like the detox process specifically with the addiction recovery process is just heavily supported in research, and it's beautiful and amazing because people can die, when they're chemically dependent or they have these systems going on in their body and you go to change it. And so it's cool to hear that that is what's happening in this space. And I'm wondering where we're at with that. I know where we are in Utah a little bit with the laws specifically, but I wonder in a more broader sense, where are we at with this kind of clinical trials, legal approval, and medical support, like maybe in the United States or in the world, if you know about that?
I do. It depends on the day, honestly. I mean, this year is such a free for all, like in every respect.
Cool.
Um, it was so when I first started in 2020, the decrim movement was just happening very mycelial. It was very much like nature. It was just popping up, like mushrooms just popping up. And cities across the country were just randomly decriminalizing mushrooms in their town. And so there were towns throughout the country where it was decriminalized to do this practice. Very, very organic and spontaneous. Then the state of Oregon was the first statewide. Colorado was next. And then I think Alaska's getting close. New Mexico's getting close. It's it's so hard to follow because it's not where you would think. A lot of people think California would be the first. They're not. They're not. And so it's just happening very yeah, unpredictably, which is very mushroom-like. And in terms of the research was really, really full steam ahead in the last few years, kind of led by MDMA was leading the way because they were going through FDA trials and that was kind of full steam ahead. And so there was an effect where it was kind of bringing other psychedelic medicine along the way and lots of research done on psilocybin and high dose journeys of psilocybin. So it's pretty well established in the science now that high dose psilocybin ceremony journeys are tremendously effective, especially for depression, nervous system, many addictions, smoking cessation, alcohol cessation. They're starting to study Parkinson's recently. They had a really promising study with Parkinson's. Microdosing is less researched, just because it's less everything. We tend to focus since the 60s on high dose psychedelics, but more and more people are coming to hear of microdosing and really appreciating that it's far more safe. It's far more stable to start somebody on microdosing. It's not as destabilizing. It's much less risk to start somebody microdosing. You don't have to leave your day-to-day life to do it. And it gives you time to test how are you going to interact with the medicine. Are your gifts physical, mental, emotional, spiritual? Give yourself time because often on even at a microdosing level, you could kind of predict what your journey is going to be like to some extent. So, in terms of the scientific research, we're in the middle of a training right now for our facilitator program, and the scientists just presented the very latest research on microdosing. And it's still part of it, the problem with the research is, for example, like the research will show for some people microdosing is really effective. For some people, it stirs up some anxiety or some grief or sadness comes up.
Mhm.
Well, when you're looking through the pharmaceutical lens, they put that in the category of doesn't work,
Yeah.
isn't
Contraindication.
effective,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Or maybe
Whereas if you
producing the opposite effect of what we want. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And so if you're treating it like a drug, yes, that's probably true, but that's not the way healing actually works, right? And so once you work with the body, once you work with the spirit and the soul, you know that for big of emotion to come up, that is the healing process. We are often destabilized to some extent when we're growing, when we're changing, when we're evolving. And so that's not something wrong or something bad. It just needs to be cared for and nurtured and held. And so it's difficult to kind of read the research to know something's effective or not, because oftentimes it's not just the data, it's the scientists are making meaning about that data and assigning works doesn't work when you're coming from more of a guideship perspective for someone to have some grief come up and shed tears and feel a little tender and soft for a couple weeks in the process. That's healing. That's good. And we're clapping that on when we see that.
That's amazing. And it does bring up the point, the difficulty in facilitation and support during that, because when you do a big dose journey and you're writing research, you have the medical support, the emotional support, a spiritual staff there. And so it's all, like you said, kind of couched, and the metrics are read differently because you're guided all the way through that. And then you can measure an end result or later results in the week to come. But when you're microdosing over a long period of time, what does the support network look like? And I'm assuming you train facilitators for, supporting people during microdose versus supporting people during a journey. And I'm wondering what someone could expect. Like if I had the question, I want a microdose, right? What would I be looking for as terms of support or facilitator coming to you or one of your trainees? Not just being handed the material and a schedule, but knowing these things could come up. What would one need in support of that?
Hmm. Great question. Fundamentally, when you're working with someone in microdosing, you're working with them in the earth realm. When you're working with someone in a journey, you're in spirit's realm. You are not in your natural state. So they're very different skill sets, right? You're holding very different space. In some ways, the spirit world is way more interesting and way, way easier. Um, in some ways, in other ways, it's more challenging, right? But when you're microdosing guiding, the beauty of microdosing is it's part of your everyday life. So the integration is there for you from day one. Psilocybin, too, of all the medicines, I find it's an exceptionally relational medicine. It really plays on your relationship to yourself, your relationship to the world, your relationship to other. And so it's really beautiful when you're practicing in the earth realm. You get to see your growth all the time in your relationship, how you move through the world, your experience, how you read the world, things that happen. And you're like, wow, I really responded to that quite differently. I can tell this is doing something. It's very, very common. But it's hard to put metrics on that, when you're
It reminds
assessing
me of like
yourself.
when you start going to therapy or something, right? And you get a therapist, but it's like you're going to check in with them every week. So if they stirred something up or they gave you a tool or things become messy or they see a positive result, you're going to go back and check in with them in a week and be like, I'm going to talk about that with my therapist. And so I think it would be really helpful to know that. I love how you labeled that and be like, well, I can't just be out here on my own for 90 days because I may be act tender. Actually, that's what happens to me when I do like feel called to a microdosing like period of my life or working with it. I actually know I'm going to be really tender. My emotions are going to be right there on the surface. And so I have to make sure I have skills or tools or a coach or a therapist who are encouraging me in that regard as opposed to like being met with um I want to say a lot of just friction in the world because that's not readily acceptable. And so I need to be ready with my tools and the way I speak about it, and be willing to like be really honest in things. Otherwise, things get a little, you know,
Crunchy.
gritty.
Yeah.
Gritty. And so I love that you mentioned that. And I think that's important for people to understand. And I also just keep on harping on this point that's like you made this point that this stuff is really readily available on many levels in a lot of different places, states where it's legal and states where it's not. And so training facilitators and having education and going to someone who has got that education, I think is really important at this point because it's out there and it could be done in unsupportive ways.
Hmm.
And supportive ways. And I know a lot of people, like you said, are out there looking to expand spiritually and looking for help. And quite frankly, do have some grounding and some beautiful gifts, right? So where do we kind of settle on that? And I just think it's always a reminder to just say, be educated, follow your intuition, do some research, give yourself a leg up. Like, so I think it's
Hmm.
beautiful. And if people are wanting to do that, get in a training program like yours, even if they just want to do it for themselves. I find that really beneficial. How many people go through your trainings and programs just for themselves or their families, not because they're like starting a business doing this?
Oh, most start there. Yeah. And
Okay.
that's the ideal way to start as a guide. I've had so many people, more guides than not are accidental guides. They had no idea going in. They did it for themselves. They were drawn to it, sometimes very loudly, where they're like, I can't believe I'm kind of doing this, but I just kept coming up and it kept coming up. And then I found you in the serendipitous way. And they do it and they start for themselves and their own experience, but it's very, very common for them to be drawn to serve others.
I love that. Oh,
Mhm.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm wondering if we can talk about some of the spiritual benefits. Like, do you have like a really cool story? Maybe you can dive deeper into like, was it the mushrooms that told you where to move and to move across the country and things like that?
It was definitely my guide, who, in hindsight now, like I can see she has always been there. Like there has never been a moment of this lifetime that she has not been with me. It's kind of comical how obvious it is in hindsight. There's so many like symbols and clues and her signs are there in my childhood. Um, and I would sense her presence and I would like at pivotal times in my life where she would come through and she's very direct. And sometimes she would cut through. Um, Even those moments in life where I was very cloudy and incoherent for many years, she would cut through and give me guidance. But it really leaped forward when I studied intuition medicine. So I did a lot of body work, a lot of energy work, and then I studied intuition medicine, learned some skills to connect. That's when I started to um, know like she was a recognizable person to me and would come through more often, a presence I could feel. But it wasn't until I started practicing with mushrooms that it went to an entirely new level. So it was really working with microdosing. Ultimately, I felt confident enough and trusted the medicine and myself and my brain enough to work at a journey level. She's with me in every journey I do. She's always on the other side to meet me. And what's interesting is she guided me to leave California a couple years ago and move to Florida, which was very counterintuitive, if you know me. But again, I listened to her, and it was within maybe 7, 8 weeks of getting here to this specific energy that my spiritual connection to her just expanded even more to the point where it's like a direct channel now. Now she just comes in whenever she feels like it, often, and just goes, get out of the way. I got the floor. So that's the way it happened. And I think with people often ask me, is this available to everyone? And I do think to some extent, I think we all have spiritual gifts. And spirit talks to us all different ways. Some people it's through the body, some people it's through the mind. I'm a mental projector, so it's directly through my mind. It's like comes in and I speak it out like that. But other people have that all different ways, and I feel like mushrooms open us up to our gifts. And that's what enables you to, not that everybody's going to channel or everybody has one. Some people have like a whole team of angels and guides, right? Um, but mushrooms really help you remediate and clear a lot of your incoherent energy, heavy, dense energy, fear energy that kind of gets in the way between you and your guides.
Have you heard people say that it helps them with childhood trauma and things that like they can't heal from, like these treatment resistant people with PTSD and CPTSD? Are they actually having experiences specifically with that? And what does that look like?
Yes, beautiful question. Yeah, I work with a lot of people, and a lot of my guide colleagues do as well, of things that are trauma, rooted in trauma and wounding in this lifetime and sometimes previous lifetimes that go are so far beyond the mind and beyond talking. Like so many of people say, I've been in therapy for so many years. I've done everything. I've done every training, every program, every every behavioral thing I can do. I've tried medication, I've done mind things, mindset things, but I can't get to it. Like it's at a layer that I can't get to. And mushrooms can get there. They get there and they heal. And what's so hard for our Western minds to grapple, get around is we're so conditioned we need to do something to heal. We need to earn our healing in some ways, right? And a lot of mushroom work is receiving. It's kind of opening ourselves, creating the conditions and potentiating the healing, and then let the mushrooms open the door for us. And so big expansions can happen, big openings, big healing through a dream, through somatic practices. I've had a lot of women who had childhood sexual abuse, trauma. Um, they've worked so hard at their healing for so many decades, and they'll start working with mushrooms, and they'll be in a therapy session or in a bodywork session getting a massage, and they will feel heavy energy lift from their body and move out in one session. And it's almost too like our minds can't get around like it can't be this easy. And we have to remind them like you've been doing this work for 30 years. It didn't happen in one session. It's you've been preparing
Yeah.
for this for 30 years, and it was just the mushrooms are the key.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I'd heard it described too, like with our neurological pathways and ruts that just get stronger and more beefed up, over time, that because the medicine can break those down, you have some moments of clarity or some moments where you can stand outside the rut as a metaphor, right? I know how neurology works, but just kind of as an energetic metaphor, you can have a break from those synapses that fire automatically to be able to see or understand something else. And so when you take that after the journey, after the microdosing, or into the integration part of it, like the behavioral embodied part of it, that is actually what's building the new neurological connections and the understanding, which is sounds like, I mean, in everything I've read and like talk there, the things you do, nothing can give you access to that. And so it's like you are trying to lift like 10,000 pound rocks, like with your muscles. And I think that's where the idea of us earning it has to come in too, is we just have to work so hard at this impossible task, which quite frankly is impossible sometimes with the physicality we're given. And so to have a plant medicine, to have materials in this world that we've been given uh, that can actually aid you in this stuff, it seems so beautiful and so natural, and it seems like it would have a spirit about it too. In your experience, how would you describe, and you said a couple words earlier I wanted to circle back to, the spirit of the mushrooms. I think you said receiving, I think you said gentle, I think you said the way they work is this.
Yeah, I mean, my experience, I think every guide will have a different take on this, but I think each medicine is so unique. How it connects with each person is deeply unique too, based on their soul. But mushrooms have such an intelligence to them, a wisdom to them. I mean, they've been around for millennia. They've been through multiple extinction events. They contain all of this knowledge and wisdom in them that they're gifting us with. It's a lot. It's a lot beyond our mental comprehension. And I find the spirit of mushrooms often when I'm watching, holding space for people microdosing, oftentimes as a guide, it's pattern recognition, right? And kind of translate nature like something's happening, but it's not logical always. And you're like, huh, why is this happening? And this was their intention. And then this is happening. And then oftentimes in hindsight, or with the help of spirit sometimes, is you see what they're doing and it's like, it seems indirect, but that was actually the straightest line to the heart of what was actually going on. So it's really important, especially for people who've been on pharmaceutical medications for so many years. Lots of times, I always love asking what's going on in your life when you went on that medication originally. And sometimes people will go back and when they share the story, it's like, it was such an opening. It was like they were cracking open and it was an opportunity for healing. And unfortunately, they were medicated in response when really I can see sometimes how the medicine in present day is going straight to that original wound that happened years ago. It's really amazing. And they're also really funny too. Mushrooms, I find they're very cheeky. They're very witty and funny and clever, and they kind of let us think we know best and then prove us otherwise often.
That's funny. I know I'd heard people say lots of things about it. I was like, I wonder how, and that hindsight piece that you mentioned too, I'm curious about that too, because a lot of that has been my personal experience. And as I watch and hear and facilitate, for other people, I wonder about that because sometimes you lose track of them after time. Like you can say, here's my 3 months, 6, whatever program, but you kind of lose track of them after that. And then my personal experience has been even like 2 years later, I've had like, oh, I was actually told that. Like, actually, now I understand that vision. And that's exactly what was happening. And so like these layers come back, and part of me is like, and interesting that I would be shown that at a time where it either meant so little to me or I interpreted it so superficially. And so I'm wondering in your experience with that hindsight, because I don't get to talk to a lot of people 5 years down the road where they're like, and at that moment, now this is what it means in my life. And that fascinates me.
That's so common. It's so,
Okay.
so common. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've met so many people. It's so fun when I interview people or meet people for the first time. They'll often confide, I did a mushroom journey and it showed me where I was going to live or who I was going to work with, sometimes very, very specifically and nothing they could have conceived of at the time in another state, doing something that they could not have conceived. And it's only in hindsight, they're like, wow, that was spot on. But yeah, the beauty of that, like I have 6 week containers and then we have a community so people can come in and come out. And so some people love to stay in touch and other people will just come back and dip back in like 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later. And it's exactly like you said. It's remarkable how many people they can look back and go, gosh, I didn't it was so subtle at the time that I kind of missed it or I just didn't think it was that important. But now all these years later, here we are.
That's so cool. Okay. I want to be respectful of our time, and I have a couple more questions. Can I rapid fire them at you?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so here's the question. Who should, in your experience, um, pursue this or get curious about this, or it should help? And there's like a tag to that question, which is like, who should we be offering it to? And should we ever mention it or push it on people who we think could benefit, but like they haven't sought it out themselves? Like spiritually, like medically, like what's the repertoire there between talking about this? Like, you should do this. This could help you. Wait till they ask. Like all of those sort of things.
I love this question. Fantastic. So, in terms of like who is this for? Mushrooms are so broad and diverse and can do so many things. It's almost better to approach it from like who is this not for? Because that's been my experience. Um I've worked with people 19 to 91 and from all different backgrounds and people, majority of people benefit. The people I caution the most, and this is interesting, is people who are already in a state of like peak emotionality. So lots of times people think that psilocybin microdosing is going to be a remedy or a salve or help them move them through a difficult time. No. It's really big honesty. And so it's great if your soul is ready for that, if you're resourced, if you're supported. So for example, if someone comes to me and says, my wife just left me 2 days ago. Should I microdose? I'm like, no, I'm going to work with you. We might start microdosing a few months from now, but you're already kind of pinned at your peak level of emotion just because working with natural medicines bring things up, bring things out. And if life is already bringing things up and out, you don't need to do more of that. So I check people's like level of emotional resilience. What have they been through? What have they held in their life? How much work have they done? How are they with discomfort and holding big emotion? That's how I'll kind of work with people. And if people aren't ready yet for psilocybin, I'll often start them with lifestyle practices instead, or a medicine like Amanita mushroom, the red mushroom with little white dots, first.
The Mario
Because
mushroom?
the Mario mushrooms, exactly, the emoji mushrooms.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And then
Oh,
in terms of recommending it to people, this is such a gorgeous inquiry because, and a lot of guides ask this question because they're like, well, what do you tell people like when people confront you or there's have still have a lot of stigma or ask you to convince them, right? Or somebody can really benefit, but they're not there yet. In my experience, the way like it's a soul calling, like your soul and spirit will be called to practice exactly the right timing. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with where they can look back in hindsight and everything was about to change and they didn't know it. And it was like, that's when it happens. It's like, it's ready when you're ready for a big portal, ready for a big expansion. You're about to move, you're about to change jobs, you're about to meet the love of your life. Like something's going to happen. And that's when you get called to do it. So it's very individual and it's kind of spirit going, you over here. And we can't do that for another, right? And so when people really want their loved one to change and to do this, and it would benefit, I always say put the intention out there and hold it and just let them come to you because you shifting your own energy is the greatest magnet there is. And so I've seen so many, especially couples who the other half of the couple is like either super skeptical or disinterested.
Yeah.
They're like, honey, you go do your woo, and
Yeah.
I love you, but I'm not interested in this. And they're like, okay, I know it'll help your sleep, and I know it'll help your diet, and I know this, but okay, fine. And a few weeks later, the spouse that's practicing has shifted so much, not even saying a word, that they out of the blue come to them and go, whatever it is you're doing, can I do that with you?
Yeah.
And that's how it happens. That's
That's
how it always happens.
beautiful because like something you just said a sentence ago when you were like, you know it could really help them, but they're not ready. And my mind went, but will it? Because if they're not ready, right? Those, I mean, those are the cases where it maybe it won't, or maybe it just wouldn't have the impact, or the things wouldn't happen as positively, and we don't want to be responsible for that. And then I know you know a lot about human design and astrology and things like that too. So I know that there are spaces and places for us to be in the truth of our being, and that, I mean, we are the messages from the universe for other people. So as far as like never offering or pushing or saying, like, especially in those spousal situations, those are the most tricky because as soon as you get something awesome, you're like, come with me. And you have to try to not. And I would imagine there are places where you can tell your story and you can say things like, this is available. And have you considered? And maybe you want to look into that, no pressure. And there are places where maybe we are the voice of that. And I have found that that is less, but that is pertinent. And I feel like I'm a receiver of that. Maybe you're more the perpetrator. But we talked about our human designs as a sacral response.
Totally,
I actually
totally.
do appreciate when people say things because, like if some of my shaman come back in town and they send me a text, that is how I'll know when it's time, and I wouldn't if it wasn't presented to me, not pushed on me, but I appreciate invitations, and then I can sit with those responses. And so that's kind of why I asked you the question too, and I could imagine you can coach your facilitators depending on their human design and their truth to know when to say something, but to be really careful to not ever, and at least for me, I don't feel like there's ever a time where I know better. And so I don't ever say that. Like, I don't ever say, this is what you need, because I love what you said about just spirit calling them and then them showing up. That feels like the only space I would feel comfortable working in. It's
Hmm.
just that full sovereignty, but it's so beautiful, and people need to learn how to listen to that too, right? I also want to mention that's really cool that you said it happens right before a shift is going to happen. So maybe listeners be looking for that. And I also love the thing you said about being at their emotional peak. A word that was coming to me was raw. When people are really raw, I have seen a lot of more of that can damage the nervous system and make it take longer to heal. It reminded me of like when we work in recovery or with addicts, practices like cold plunging or Raja practices or Yang practices like breath work and stuff, they're actually not good for people who are in trauma response. They'll cause more trauma if you drop somebody in ice water who's already in trauma, or you ask them to do breath work and flood their system with DMT when they can't regulate. It has to be really soft. And I didn't know if you thought psilocybin was in that category or not.
Yes, I love this point. So, in our training program just this week, actually, our class was on microdosing for addiction and recovery. And I
Okay.
had two guides who specialize in working in addiction recovery, utilizing microdosing. And they talked a lot about that and how it is. They said all addicts share that in common is a highly dysregulated nervous system. So, if you come in really jarring, really fast with these very harsh, yang interventions, you're destabilizing them even more. That's why, like, the big medicines like ayahuasca are often can destabilize people who were already destabilized even more so. So, starting with microdosing, it's very feminine, it's very subtle, it's very gentle, and it allows people to feel safe. At the same time, you're building a rapport with your guide, your coach, your therapist, whoever you're working with within a container of care. It's often that in and of itself is so healing to just be soaked in that energy. I worked with a gentleman in recovery once, um, and I was talking to his wife well into his process, and she shared with me, we had time, a moment alone, and she shared that it was the first time he had ever worked in his recovery with someone who was so feminine and gentle. All of his, because he went toward what he was familiar with. It was like his abusive father. And then he went into the military, was like he repeated trying the pattern over and over again. And it actually, what ended up being the most healing for his nervous system was the far other end of the spectrum. It was yin yoga. It was gentle breath work. It was being the only man in a group of women in his case. So, yeah, I appreciate that a lot.
Well, that's beautiful. Well, thank you for speaking to that with the experience and those experts behind it because that's really cool. And I'm glad we're mentioning on here too, so that someone can think, where am I? Because I do get a lot of people who are in heightened nervous states saying, I want to cold plunge with you. I want to go to your hot yoga with you. And it's also very difficult to tell people like that. You do need to sit with yin, or maybe we want to be gentle because also that takes a minute for them to like, get there. And so I love that validation and reminder to just say, where are we with this? And a personal story, I actually got three flat tires in the last week on two different vehicles. And I was like, I know you're trying to tell me something.
You
But
think?
I had to look it up. And some of the things that were coming up that resonated with me was slow down, um, like go after or reach towards more spiritual practices like needing air means like needing more of that feminine spiritual practice. And I was like, that's funny that I couldn't even slow down enough to intuit the message, which I usually can. I had to like look it up. And that's kind of what resonated with me was a lot of the things you're saying, slow back down, and the mushrooms are such a beautiful messenger for that. Like you said, they're not the messenger of the ayahuasca or the like. Sometimes we're in a place of expansion. Sometimes I mentioned Stan Grof's 4 stages of pregnancy or labor, you know about those. And so I feel like just after birth, when there's the light at the end of the tunnel, the third and fourth stage, right? You're pushing for something. You know where you're going. It's going to take some labor or that new birth, right? That's the time for expansion and things like that. But stage one and stage two, a lot of that is time for receiving. And this is seems like that's where this medicine sits for most people based on what I'm hearing you say. Would you agree with that, or would you add any kind of final thoughts about how to couch this?
Very much, very much. When I was just starting out and forming groups, I remember I was caught up a lot in, affinity groups that people needed to have things in common. Like, do I need to put people with this demographic together and these people? And ended up that was not the case at all. Souls are souls, and they group themselves together just fine without my intervention. And but what was very important is the level of where a soul was. Like right now on the planet, we have very, very old souls and we have very, very, very young souls. And that's very different, right? We just need to walk outside to see evidence of that. We also have souls within this lifetime who have come in with a lot of work. I work with a lot of contemplative practitioners who've meditated for 40 years or done Qigong for 50 years, or they're artists. And so they're constantly these open creative channels. Someone that has been working with their soul for decades is going to be in a very different place than someone who's venturing into this for the first time. So when it comes to protocols and practices and their dosing, their process with the medicine is and their path with the medicine is going to be a very different journey in terms of the speed. I'll work with like a psychic or a 70 plus year old woman that's had a 40-year contemplative practice and she's like boom from day one. She's like off, spirits takes her and goes off with her. For someone who's brand new to practice or who is a very young soul, it's a very different journey and path with them.
Wow, that's beautiful. What is coming up for you in the collective conscious right now? And because you get to see this kind of work really close up on a basis, like are there any messages or things on your heart that would be fun for us to know that you feel like sharing?
So much. Thanks for asking. One of the things that I mean, so much has come through from my guide. I will credit her because this comes from her. Is she really emphasized to me, I was seeing things in people and I was like, why are these things coming on? Like a lot of people were saying they could not focus, like mentally, they're like scrambled eggs. They can't focus, they can't read a book anymore. Like, what is going on? Feeling really ungrounded. People who were normally beat pretty steady were very anxious and sped up. Like time was kind of like too fast or too slow. They kind of felt like they were jet lagged all the time in a weird way. And so I asked her what that was about, and she described it as we're moving from a time of earth and water into the time of fire and air. And this is the first time the background frequency of what holds us is completely shifting. And it's this year. So we're kind of like on that edge where we're kind of leaving the old and it's very new. We're all sitting, we're all like being held right now in a very different energetic background. And so if you imagine earth and water, it's gravity, it's grounding, it's steadying us, like it holds us, it's nurturing, it's steadying, it's something we can solid, we can touch and feel and ground into.
Yeah.
Fire and air is fast. It's it's dispersive. It's so on a positive sense, like we're going to create so fast in the future. Like we're going to be able to manifest from our spirit and our soul so fast compared to what we're used to. We're not going to have to work and plod and
Yeah.
9 to 5 it anymore. Like we're going to be such different beings in the way we create and build things. But right now, it's really disorienting because we almost feel untethered, and we are, right? So we're like the speed of which life is coming at us is very disorienting right now. Like that's why we all need our tires popped to do
So,
things to intentionally slow our roll.
yes.
Let less be carried away. So knowing this, like a lot of my clients that are expressing this, we're working with the medicines to really come into our bodies.
Mhm.
So really a greater preciousness and attention to our physical bodies right now is important to ground us and kind of come home, come down, come home, come
Yes.
in here, come
Mhm.
in here. That's what they're for. And create a home inside our bodies and also just give yourself time to give yourself time to recalibrate, almost like when you go to a new altitude. When you're in an altitude that's quite different or a different energy to place, like give yourself time to settle in because you're not crazy. Like it's not just you, it's you and a very different energy that we're in. Like the earth is growing, the earth's going through its own portal of change right now, the same time we are. So give it kind of a stretch of the next couple of years to acclimate.
Next couple years. Okay, I was going to say that's good advice. I wanted to hear that advice. Come into your body, find grounding practices, and it's okay to do that because we will still naturally be sped up and be part of the fire and air. It's coming no matter what, right? And our practices of grounding are going to be very important, is what I heard you say. And it's okay to slow down. It's okay to say, wait a minute. It's okay to like integrate that. I have felt that in a huge way. Thank you for that validation and advice and like direction of what to do with it when you feel that. I'm sure
Hmm.
feeling that. You're right. I have heard that.
Hmm.
That's beautiful. And thank you to her and to you for telling it to us. That feels
Thank
important. I wonder if at the end, if you have anything more to add, please do, because I love the things that I've been hearing from you on our call and in here. I feel like it's important and it's beautiful and pertinent, and how people could get a hold of you. Like, how can we stay in touch with the things that are coming up in your offerings?
Thank you for the opportunity. I would just emphasize what I share a lot with my community right now, like really take pristine care of your body. It's our body is this amazing technology and intelligence, and especially when you're working with earth medicines and plant medicines of any kind, and even if you're not there, like working with herbs, it's a really beautiful time for spirit to kind of communicate with us through our bodies. And our bodies can help us navigate a lot of this energetic change ahead. Yeah. Um, where to find me? I'm on all the socials out there. And then our platform is at Microdosing for Healing. And that's all the things live there. So we have a global community, which is great if you just kind of are curious and you want to learn by other people, like living real people in real world, like doing this practice. It's fun just to dip in and learn a lot, grow your confidence that way, all the way up to I've had a practice, I'm doing this practice, and I'm called to do this to kind of serve my community or do circles, or do become a full-time microdosing guide. We have programs for that too.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And that will all be in the show notes and the tags. So I'm so grateful. Grateful for your energy and your advice, and your willingness to share and just your willingness to follow your intuition and body and guides, because it creates abundance and blessings for so many others. And so that is just such a blessing when someone's following their passion and their dharma in this life. I feel like it's just really expansive. I'm grateful for you.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
You're welcome. Thank you. I usually just at the end, yoga teacher at heart. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you for listening. Connect with me on Instagram at Crystal Zinn Yoga. Subscribe on my website at crystalzinnyoga.com to receive tools and practices for your holistic journey and to be the first to know about offerings, workshops, trainings, and retreats. We live in powerful times that require courage, bravery, compassion, authenticity, community, and grounding. You're not alone. Check out my free content, classes, and meditations on YouTube under Crystal Zinn Yoga, and have a beautiful day. Sat Nam.